Have you ever wondered what happens after death? Is there something beyond this world, a place where souls are welcomed or judged? The Bible teaches us that there is a time for all things under heaven, including birth and death. But what if a child came back from the other side with a message that defies everything we know? The account you are about to hear is not just a story, but a powerful testimony that can change your view of life, death, and God's divine plan for each of us. This child had a near-death experience, and what she saw defies science, logic, and even human understanding. His testimony reminds us of Jesus' words, "In my Father's house are many mansions," John 14:2. But are we ready to hear the truth about what awaits us in the afterlife? We often ignore the signs, avoid thinking about eternity, and go on with our lives as if we were going to live forever. But this story makes us reflect. Are we prepared for the day when we will be called? If you've ever lost a loved one, have you ever wondered where they are now? Has she found peace? Are you on God's side or facing spiritual judgment? Today's story brings a stunning revelation, something this child saw and heard before returning to life, and the most impactful, she brought a message to all of us. What she said upon returning from her near-death experience will stir your soul and make you rethink everything you believe about eternal destiny. Prayer has the power to connect us to the divine, to make us feel the presence of God, and to prepare us for eternity. But how often do we forget to pray? How many times do we set aside Jesus' teaching and follow our own will? This story is a warning, a call for us to wake up before it is too late. For as it is written in Matthew 24:44, "Therefore also be prepared, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect it." What this child said upon returning from the other side cannot be ignored. It's a message so strong, so impactful, that it left his family in shock. But before continuing, I want to ask you, do you believe in life after death? Do you believe that God speaks to us through signs and spiritual experiences? If you have ever experienced something inexplicable, something that touched your heart in a profound way, share your story in the comments. Your experience could be the answer someone needs to strengthen their faith. Before you start, leave a like to spread this message to more people. Subscribe to the channel and discover stories that can transform your view of life and eternity. Pay attention, because what will be revealed today could change everything. His name was Noah, a boy of just 7 years old, full of energy, with a smile that lit up any room. Since he was little, he was always curious about everything. He asked questions that surprised adults, and he had an innocent look, but full of depth, as if he saw the world in a different way. Noah loved playing in his backyard, where he spent hours running barefoot on the grass, feeling the wind hit his face and watching the clouds as if they hid secrets that only he could understand. He was the type of child who noticed small details that went unnoticed by others, always found beauty in the simplest things, and spoke about God in a way that left his parents impressed. But no one could have imagined that, at such a young age, he would have an experience that would forever change his outlook on life and eternity. It was an ordinary day, with nothing that could indicate what was about to happen. Noah played outside while his mother prepared dinner, and his father watched the news. He loved exploring the yard, climbing trees, and imagining incredible stories. But that afternoon, something got out of control. He climbed the wall at home, something his parents always asked him to avoid. Maybe it was the adrenaline, maybe it was just that typical childish boldness, but Noah lost his balance. In a second, he was firmly on his feet. The next, everything became a blur. He fell. The blow was strong. The sound of the impact was so loud that his mother ran outside in despair. His heart sank when he saw his son lying on the ground, motionless. His father arrived soon after, his voice shaking as he called the boy's name. But Noah didn't respond. He was there, lying down, his small and fragile body in the middle of the yard, while his parents tried to understand if he was still breathing. Despair took over when they realized he wasn't reacting. Time seemed to have stopped. Seconds turned into hours as they tried to revive him. An emergency call was made, and paramedics arrived quickly. Everything was confused, chaotic. Noah's parents were prevented from joining him in the ambulance, and that brief moment of separation was the longest and most painful of their lives. They could only pray, asking God to bring their son back. Noah, however, was no longer there. He no longer felt the pain of the fall, nor did he hear the distressed voices around him. What he saw in that instant was beyond human comprehension. He felt like he was floating, like he had been freed from something that had always held him back but that he never realized. When he looked down, he saw his own body. He saw his mother crying, his father on his knees, holding his little hand, the paramedics trying to bring him back. But at the same time, he felt an inexplicable peace, a warmth that enveloped his entire being. There was a light, a presence, something like nothing he had ever experienced before. Noah felt like he was being called. He couldn't say by whom, but a soft and powerful voice at the same time echoed around him. Time, as he knew it, no longer existed. Everything was different, as if he were somewhere else, a completely new and indescribable reality. He found himself surrounded by a peace that words could not describe, but that was just the first part of his journey. What he saw next, and especially what he heard, would bring a message that no one could ignore. Noah felt an intense cold run through his body before everything went dark. The world around him seemed to have disappeared into a deep silence, a void without time or space. He couldn't say how long he lay there, feeling nothing, not hearing his parents' despair or the sounds of the ambulance approaching. His body lay motionless on the ground as life slowly drained away, and no one could understand what was really happening to him. Paramedics arrived in a hurry, applying emergency procedures. His mother screamed. His father tried to remain calm, but his eyes were full of tears. Noah's heart had stopped. Time seemed to no longer exist. He didn't feel pain. He didn't feel scared, but he also didn't know exactly where he was. It was then that he noticed something strange. His consciousness was there, but his body wasn't. He opened his eyes and saw the scene outside, as if he was just a spectator. He saw his mother crying, desperate, begging him to come back. He saw the paramedics trying to revive him, while his father, normally so strong and confident, was on his knees, holding his small, cold hands. But Noah didn't feel any of that. It was as if he was suspended in the air, floating lightly, observing everything from an impossible angle. The weight of his body was no longer there. At first, he tried to speak. He tried to call for his mother, but he realized that no one was listening to him. Time seemed to have slowed down. The once agitated voices began to become a distant echo, as if they were very far away from him. He looked at his own hands and noticed something was different. There was a slight transparency to them, a subtle golden glow that pulsed gently. But what scared him most was the feeling of being pulled upward, as if an invisible force was calling him somewhere he couldn't see. It was then that Noah felt an immense heat envelope his body, a heat unlike anything he had ever experienced before. It wasn't suffocating nor uncomfortable. It was a feeling of welcome, as if he were being embraced by something bigger, something he didn't understand. He looked around, and everything started to change. The environment around him became brighter, but it was not the common light we are used to seeing in everyday life. It was a living, pulsating light, something that seemed to be charged with love, peace, and an inexplicable presence. Noah felt a light breeze touch his face, but there was no wind there. It was as if light itself was moving around him. Suddenly, all his worries, his fears, and any pain he might have felt moments before were completely gone. For the first time in his life, he felt there was no sadness, no doubt, just a deep understanding that everything was exactly as it should be. It was then that he realized he was not alone. There was something, or someone, there with him. He couldn't see clearly, but he felt a presence beside him. A voice, calm and at the same time powerful, echoed around him. It wasn't like a normal voice that came through your ears, but something that spoke directly to your soul. Noah, it's not your time yet. He tried to understand what that meant. What do you mean it wasn't your time? Where was he going? He wanted to ask. He wanted to understand, but before he could react, he was overcome by a series of visions. He saw things he could never imagine. Images flashed before his eyes, as if they were memories of something he had not yet experienced, people he didn't know, places he'd never seen, and then something that made his heart race. Noah saw what appeared to be an immense golden gate, shining with an intense light, but before he could get closer, everything changed. The light grew brighter, and then he saw something that took his breath away. In an instant, all the peace I felt was replaced by something different. He saw a great judgment taking place before his eyes. People were standing in front of a light so bright that their faces could not be seen clearly. There was absolute silence, but at the same time it seemed like everything was being said without words. It was then that Noah realized what was happening. He was in front of final judgment. That wasn't just a common sight. He felt deep in his being that he was seeing something real, something that many people had doubted, but that was now impossible to deny. He wanted to ask what that meant. He wanted to understand why he was seeing that, but before he could react, he felt a force pull him back. Everything started to get dark again, the feeling of lightness was disappearing, and then he heard familiar voices. His mother was calling his name. The pain returned. The sound of devices beeping around him was the first thing he heard clearly. He blinked a few times, trying to understand where he was. The hospital lights were bright, but nothing compared to the light he had seen moments before. He felt the touch of his mother's hand on his face and knew he was back, but he was no longer the same. Noah tried to speak, but his voice was weak. He looked around, saw his parents crying, the doctors at his side, and then he closed his eyes for a moment. He still felt that presence, still heard that voice in his mind. It's not your time yet. But what did all this mean? Why had he seen what he saw? And most importantly, why was he sent back? Experiences like this have the power to open your eyes to a greater truth. If you believe there is something beyond life, write in the comments, "I believe in the other side." Your interaction can bring this message to more people who need to hear it. Keep watching, because what Noah revealed when he woke up will surprise you. Noah still felt the warmth of that light when everything around him started to change. The hospital, the doctors, the sound of the machines, everything disappeared, as if it had never existed. He couldn't tell if he was dreaming or if it was real, but the sensation was unlike any dream he had ever had before. It wasn't something imagined. It seemed more vivid than any memory in his entire life. He felt as if he were being carried by an invisible force, taken to a place his mind could not yet comprehend. Little by little, he began to see around him, and what he saw left him completely speechless. Before him, a golden immensity stretched out, an intense glow that did not hurt the eyes but filled everything with an indescribable peace. It was a place where time didn't exist, where everything seemed to be in perfect harmony. He saw something that looked like a sky, but it was different from the blue sky he knew. It was something deeper, as if the light itself had life, as if each ray brought a feeling of love and welcome. The ground beneath his feet seemed to be made of something that glowed softly, like glass mixed with gold, reflecting the light that came from all directions. But what impressed him most was the silence. Not an empty or frightening silence, but a silence that conveyed a peace he had never felt before. Noah felt a light breeze touch his face, but there was no wind. He felt a presence next to him, but didn't see anyone right away. It was then that he realized he was not alone. Soft voices echoed around him, whispering words that he didn't fully understand, but that filled his heart with a feeling of love and belonging. He tried to walk, but realized he didn't need to. His body moved with the simple desire to move forward, as if he were floating, being guided by something greater than himself. Suddenly, a figure began to form before him. At first, it was just a stronger glow, but soon the contours began to define themselves. It was someone tall, wearing something that looked like it was made of pure light. His face was serene, and his eyes conveyed infinite compassion. Noah felt a shiver run through his entire being, not from fear but from an awe he had never experienced before. He knew, without having to ask, that that presence was an angel. The angel looked at him with inexplicable affection and spoke without moving his lips. His voice was not like human voices. It was not just sound, but something that echoed directly within him, as if speaking to his soul. "Noah, you were brought here for a purpose," said the figure, his voice filled with love and firmness at the same time. "But your journey is not over yet. There is something you must see." Before Noah could ask what that meant, the environment around him changed again. As if he were being transported without needing to move, he found himself in front of something even grander. It was a large gate, brighter than anything he had ever seen. He couldn't explain how, but he felt that this was a sacred place, a place that many people spent their entire lives trying to imagine. However, before he could get closer, his vision was taken over by something different. Suddenly, he saw a large hall, an immense space that seemed to have no end, and inside that hall there was a crowd. Some people were standing, others were kneeling. They seemed to be waiting for something. In the center, there was an intense light so bright that Noah couldn't look directly at it, but he felt something coming from that light, something that made him understand, even without words, that there was the absolute truth. It was then that he saw something he would never forget. There was a large book, open, floating in front of that light. The pages were made of something that didn't look like paper, but something eternal, something that held deep secrets about humanity. He saw names written there, and even though he couldn't read them, he felt that each name carried the weight of a lifetime. Noah wanted to ask what that meant, but before he could speak, the angel placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "What you see is real," he said, his voice calm but full of authority. "The time is near, and many are not prepared. You need to remember this when you return." Those words made Noah's heart race. What did he mean by when he comes back? He didn't want to go back, not now. He wanted to understand more. He wanted to know what would happen to those people. He wanted to know if his name was in that book. But before he could react, everything around him began to change again. The intense glow became dimmer. The voices began to fade away, and he felt a force pulling him back. Noah tried to resist, tried to say that it wasn't time yet, but it was as if something bigger was deciding for him. He felt his body becoming heavier, the light disappearing, and then darkness came. Absolute silence. The peace began to dissipate, giving way to distant sounds, a different heat, and suddenly a sharp pain shot through his chest. His eyes opened with difficulty. The hospital lights were too bright. The noise from the equipment around him was deafening. He blinked a few times, trying to understand where he was. His mother was at the bedside, holding his hand tightly, tears streaming down her face. His father was on the other side, his eyes red, and an expression of relief mixed with shock. The surrounding doctors looked surprised. He had returned, but he was no longer the same. What he saw, what he heard, it all seemed more real than the world he was in now. He tried to speak, but his throat was dry. He needed to tell what he had seen. He needed to share what he had learned. But how to explain something so grand in human words? Noah's eyes slowly opened, blinking against the bright light of the hospital. The sound of the machines monitoring his vital signs echoed through the room, mixed with the muffled voices of the doctors and the suppressed crying of his mother, who held his hand tightly as if afraid he would disappear again. His father was on the other side, motionless, looking at him as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The last thing Noah remembered was the light, the angel, the powerful voice that spoke directly to his soul. But now he was there, back, feeling the weakness in his body, the pain in his head and his rapid breathing. He had returned, but something inside him told him that nothing would ever be the same. For a moment he couldn't say anything. His mind was still trying to process everything he had seen, everything he had felt. The contrast between the indescribable peace on the other side and the coldness of the hospital left him confused. Then he looked at his mother and, in a weak voice, murmured, "Mommy, I saw something about the future." The silence that followed was absolute. His mother's eyes widened, squeezing his hand tighter. His father stepped forward, frowning. One of the doctors stopped writing something down on his clipboard and looked at him, intrigued. Noah felt the urgency to speak, but his throat was dry. His breathing was still heavy. He tried to swallow hard, and his mother immediately grabbed some water and put the glass to his lips. After a few small sips, he took a deep breath and tried to continue. I went to a place," he said, his voice shaking. "It was beautiful. Everything was shining. I didn't feel pain. I didn't feel afraid. But then, something changed. They showed me something. Something that's going to happen." His mother's gaze filled with concern. "What did you see, my son?" Noah closed his eyes for a moment, as if the images were burned into his mind, and he needed to organize them before speaking. "I saw people standing in front of a very bright light. It was so bright that I couldn't see their faces, but I knew they were being judged." He paused, breathing hard. "And some people were happy. They were crying, but with joy. Others were desperate, trying to talk, trying to argue, but no one could change anything anymore. It was as if everything had already been decided." His father exchanged glances with his mother. Noah's voice, although weak, carried a certainty that didn't seem to belong to a 7-year-old child. The doctor, who was still in the room, stopped working with the equipment and stood still, just listening. Noah looked at them and continued, now with more intensity. "I heard a voice that was not like ours. It spoke inside me, but it was so strong that it shook everything around. The voice said that the time is approaching and that many people are not prepared." His mother covered her mouth with her hands, tears streaming down her face. His father sat next to him, visibly shaken. "The time of what, Noah?" The boy took a deep breath, fighting the fatigue that still weighed on him. Of the end of judgment. Of the day when everyone will have to stand before God and give an account. The shock in the room was evident. Noah's mother began to cry. His father lowered his head and ran his hand over his face, as if trying to find some rational explanation for what he was hearing. The doctor, who until then had remained quiet, cleared his throat and approached. "Noah, you had trauma. Sometimes the brain creates strange memories during moments of unconsciousness." The boy looked at the doctor, his eyes wide and bright. "I know what I saw, and it wasn't a dream." His voice, once shaky, was now firm. "They told me I had to go back. They said I needed to tell what I saw, that people need to know." Noah's mother caressed his face, trying to hold back the tears. "My love, who told you that?" Noah looked away for a moment, as if searching for the right words. "An angel. He said it wasn't my time yet. But before I came back, he showed me something else." Her mother's heart skipped a beat. "What, my son?" Noah hesitated. He didn't want to scare them, but he knew he needed to speak. "I saw the earth, but it was different. I saw the sky opening up. I saw something coming down, something so big it covered everything, and I saw people running, hiding, but there was nowhere to run." Her mother's breathing became heavy. His father seemed paralyzed. Noah looked at them with intensity. "The angel said that people need to open their eyes. That many don't believe, but will believe when it's too late. He said that there is still time, but that it is running out." The silence that took over the room was oppressive. Noah's words carried a seriousness that seemed far beyond a child's comprehension. His mother held his face in her hands, trying to hold back the tears. "My son, why did God show you this?" Noah lowered his eyes, thoughtful. "So that I could warn. So that people would know that they need to prepare, that they need to choose the right path before it's too late." His father took a deep breath, visibly shaken. "And what do we need to do, Noah?" The boy looked at him, and for the first time since he had returned, he smiled slightly. "Pray, seek God, believe. The angel said those who are ready will not be afraid, but those who ignore the warnings will wish they had listened sooner." The doctor, who until then had only been observing, rubbed his chin and looked at Noah curiously. "And are you afraid, Noah?" The boy smiled once again, with a tranquility that seemed impossible for someone who had just gone through a near-death experience. "No, because now I know that God is real, and I know that He is waiting for us. Stories like this come to us for a purpose. Anyone who feels this is a warning, write in the comments, 'I'm getting ready.' Your interaction can bring this message to more people and make them reflect on their lives. Keep watching, because what Noah saw next will reveal something even more impressive." Noah's mother froze. His son's words still echoed in his mind, as if they had a greater weight than anything he had ever heard in his life. How could a child of just 7 speak with such certainty about something so grand? How could he know that? His heart raced as he tried to come up with some rational explanation, but nothing made sense. His son wasn't just recounting a dream or something he imagined. He spoke with conviction, as if he had actually been in that place, as if he had seen with his own eyes something that no one else had seen. Noah's father was silent for a long time, just watching the boy, trying to process everything. He was a practical man, never one to talk much about religion, and now here he was, in front of his own son, hearing about the final judgment, about an angel who gave him a warning, about a future that seemed bleak to those who were not prepared. He wanted to doubt it. He wanted to say that it was nothing more than a delusion caused by the trauma, but something inside him wouldn't allow it. He knew his son. I knew when he was making up stories or exaggerating something, but now there was something different about Noah, something that could not be ignored. The doctor, monitoring the boy's recovery, tried to intervene. He said that in cases like his, it was common for the brain to create confusing memories during the unconscious state, but Noah's mother couldn't accept that explanation. There was something in his son's words, something in the way he described everything that couldn't just be imagination, and then something made his blood run cold. Noah looked directly at her and said something that made her gasp. "Mommy, I saw Grandma." She felt her body shake. His mother had passed away many years ago, before Noah was even born. He never met her, but there he was, lying in the hospital bed, saying he had seen her. Her husband remained motionless. The doctor just frowned, but she felt her heart racing like never before. "What do you mean by that, son?" Her voice came out weaker than she expected. Noah smiled softly. She told me to tell you that she's sorry for leaving so soon, and that everything's okay now. She said you need to stop feeling so guilty. Tears filled Noah's mother's eyes. How could he know this? How could I know the pain she had carried for years, the silent guilt she felt for not being able to say goodbye to her own mother before she died? She covered her mouth with her hand as she felt the weight of that revelation. There was no way Noah could make this up. He knew nothing about what happened, never heard from her, the words that now came out of her mouth. Noah's father sat next to his wife, running a hand over his face. Shock was evident in his eyes. "And what else did she say, Noah?" The boy closed his eyes for a moment, as if he was trying to remember every detail. "She said she was always close to Mom, that she never really left. And she said she was waiting for me. But it wasn't my time yet." The room fell into absolute silence. The doctor, who until then had seemed skeptical, was now visibly uncomfortable. Noah's mother sobbed softly, while his father held his hand, not knowing what to say. What was happening there was something no one could explain. After that day, everything changed. Noah was released a few days later, and as soon as he returned home, the eyes of the neighborhood were on him. The nurses who took care of him at the hospital commented on his story, and before long the news spread. People started showing up at the family home, some out of curiosity, others looking for answers. Noah, who was once just a boy like any other, was now seen as someone who had experienced something divine. Some people from the local church asked his mother to take him there so he could share what he saw. Others looked at him with fear, as if he knew more than he should about things that humans were not supposed to understand. His life was never the same again. He didn't fully understand what was going on, but he felt like he needed to talk. With each passing day, more details of that experience came back to him, and he tried to explain them as best he could. Some people believed, others doubted, but one thing was certain: no one could listen to his story and leave indifferent. One night, his mother was sitting next to him, watching him as he drew. It was something Noah always liked to do, but now his drawings were different. He no longer drew superheroes or animals like he used to. Now he was drawing intense lights, angelic figures, and something that looked like a big book. "Son, what are you drawing?" she asked softly. Noah smiled and looked at her. "What I saw, I don't want to forget." She took one of the papers and remained silent. It was a picture of something that looked like the gate he had described at the hospital. The features were simple, but there was one detail that made her shudder. Above the gate, Noah had written something. He was still learning to write, so the letters were a little crooked, but they were clear enough for her to read. "The truth is here." She looked at her son, who continued to draw calmly, as if he had no idea the impact of his words. He felt a mixture of fear and fascination. Noah wasn't the same boy anymore. He had seen something that no one else had seen, and now all she could think was, what else would he remember in time? What Noah saw and heard cannot simply be ignored. How could such a young child describe something in such rich detail, something that is directly connected to what many scriptures and spiritual testimonies have said for centuries? What makes this case even more impressive is that it was not the only one. There are countless accounts of children who have had near-death experiences and come back with stunning messages, messages that often defy everything science can explain. Reports of NDEs in children always have something in common: the innocence of words. Unlike adults who can interpret their experiences based on pre-existing beliefs, children speak what they saw without external influences. And the most intriguing thing is that many of them report seeing the same thing: an indescribable light, a presence that conveys love and peace, and, in some cases, a vision of the final judgment, a warning about what is to come. What Noah described is a pattern seen in numerous other reports around the world. Children who have had NDEs often talk about a great gate of light, about books where people's names are written, about encounters with deceased relatives whom they never met in life. Some return saying they received a mission, others return completely transformed, wiser, as if they had received knowledge that surpasses human understanding. And the question that remains is, why these children? Why do some people have this experience and others don't? Does this mean that God chooses certain people to be messengers, to bring warnings to humanity? Or are these experiences a reminder that there is much more beyond what we can see and understand? The fact is, after going through an experience like this, Noah's life would never be the same. And the truth is that your story also has the power to change many people's lives. For those who have faith, this testimony can be seen as a confirmation of what they already believe. For those who doubt it, it can be an invitation to reflection. What happens after death? What awaits us on the other side? Are we really prepared for what comes next? Many scientists try to explain near-death experiences as hallucinations caused by a lack of oxygen to the brain, but there are things that simply cannot be explained by physiological processes alone. How could a child see a deceased relative they never met and describe details that were never told to them? How could I talk about a spiritual judgment in a way so similar to religious texts written thousands of years ago? How could I convey such profound and meaningful messages that touch the hearts of so many people? The answer to these questions may never be completely understood by us, but one thing is certain: we cannot ignore these reports. Whatever your belief, Noah's story leads us to an essential question about existence, the purpose of life, and what really matters. What if this is a warning? What if these experiences are a call for us to be more attentive, more prepared? If time really is running out, as Noah said, are we living the right way? Are we putting our faith first? Are we prepared to face the truth when the time comes? Stories like this make many people rethink their lives, their choices, their priorities. They make them realize that maybe life doesn't end here, that maybe we are just on a temporary journey, preparing for something much bigger. And if this is true, how should we act from now on? Getting this far means this story touched something inside you. Perhaps you felt the presence of God, remembered something remarkable, or found answers to deep questions. Now share your experience. Was this a warning message? Have you ever heard a similar report? Write in the comments, "I heard the voice of God." Your interaction can bring this message to more people who need to hear it today. Stories like this come to us for a purpose. When something touches the heart and makes us reflect on life and eternity, it is a sign to seek more answers. Subscribe to the channel now and continue this journey, because in the next video, an even more impactful testimony can transform your view of life after death. Staying this far means that this message had a purpose in your life. Leave a like so that more people are also reached. Now there's something more waiting for you. Click on next video that appears on your body and discover a revelation that could change everything. See you there.